to Brain Balance Live, where we come together each week to discuss building those strong connections with our neurodiverse children. And each week we go over new tools to support you as a parent. I am Jessica Farmer of Farmer Loves Phonics. I'm a fellow parent and literacy advocate. And this is the beautiful Heather Wells, our amazing expert from the Brain Balance Centers near you in Texas. She is a therapist, a cognitive specialist, and national autism speaker. Hello, Heather. I want to know what we're talking about today.
Yes, I mean, this is such an important topic. Communication with kids, and sometimes it can seem like they're being dramatic or they're shutting down. Why aren't they letting me in? It can go a lot of different ways, or you wish they would say less, kind of going on tirades. And we're going to talk about some root causes of those things and how to navigate that. And so we'll just move on into the first slide. And before we even start with conversations, if your kids this is an awful day and you try to ask questions, they sort of, I don't know, whatever, give you vague responses or seeming attitude or big emotions, let's make sure the conditions are optimal first. Sometimes we can't wait to hear about our kids' days. We pick them up from school. How was your day? How was your day? They may just need a minute. They may not be ready yet. Sometimes car rides are an excellent time to talk because sort of counterintuitively, because my parents' eyes are on the road, it doesn't feel as intimidating that I have to look you in the eye while I say things that are maybe hard for me to get out. But maybe right after school, that school ride's not the time. Maybe when you take them to soccer practice later, will be. Sometimes their tank is on empty and protein is excellent. It's great to start the day that way. And it's definitely a good snack to have in the afternoons. And give that 30 minutes to sink in. They might be hangry, kind of like the car ride. Sometimes if instead of being so serious, like we're going to have a talk, and that already just feels like ominous, sort of. Let's go play catch in the backyard and make it more casual. It could be swinging, whatever is an activity that your kids enjoy. Just being outdoors. Nature is known to be so good for our mental health, whether or not there are struggles with mental health anxiety. Ask specific open-ended questions. We don't just want to say, how was your day? I've got a slide later to give some specific examples. We want to ask an open-ended question so that they're not yes-no questions, because you don't get much information that doesn't really get a back and forth dialogue and connection going, but targeted. So what did you do in science class today? I'm going to give you a lot of examples that also nurture a growth mindset, character building, that kind of thing later. The 5 whys, what that means is, sometimes if they say, Mr. Baker got onto me today. Well, why do you think he got onto you? Not what did you do? That's accusatory sounding and they might shut down. Well, why do you think he got onto you? I don't know. Well, why do you think it was? We don't accept I don't know. We can't accept I don't know if they say they don't know how they're feeling, because that very likely might be accurate. Then we want to grow that social emotional vocabulary. But on something like this, where it's about the events of the day, we don't accept I don't know as an answer. Why do you think it is? Well, I think it's because he thought I was talking. Well, why did he think that? And by the time you get through 5 layers of whys, you've kind of gotten to the real deal. And now you have a springboard for what to talk about. Calmly listen with curiosity instead of jumping into fix-it mode. We don't want our kids to suffer, and we may have just the perfect solution to this thing, but let's figure this out together is such a better thing. Or if they just know, I just need to vent right now. Do you ever vent to your spouse? You don't want them to tell you what to do. You just want them to listen until they understand. And that's another key. Listening until the other person feels understood takes longer, almost always, than listening until we understand. We may get it. If they don't know we get it, we got to keep listening. And that is such a safe space for that. And that is going to cultivate a connection in which they are more open to your input. But we want to grow independence and agency and problem-solving skills in our kids. So the more they can do on their own, with us just guiding as needed, the better, for so many reasons. And they learn how to apply an issue in this scenario to the next one that might be similar. We the more we schedule one-on-one quality time with kids, and we ask about their days, even when the days are great, they're just used to these conversations, and it doesn't feel as threatening when there's a big topic to talk about. So we want one-on-one time, mom, child, dad, child, and we also want family time. It's so important, and that's really, I think we all know that, but man, is life busy. And before you know it, wow, it's been like 2 or 3 weeks since we've done anything as a family. So having that, by the way, there is a lot of research showing us that there is as much as a 66% decrease in health risks associated with illicit drug use, promiscuous sex, risky behaviors down the road by having that connection at home and at school, having those relationships. That's what we need to build. That is such, we're talking about preventative medicine. There's nothing more preventative than that. Okay, so that's more about, let's get the situation correct. And so why else, after we do this on the next slide, might they still sort of, I think these are, that was not what I was expecting. That's fine, we're gonna go here. So let's say they are opening up to you. Go ahead, Beth. That's just not the slide I was expecting next, which means it's my doing. But let them vent. Again, reflect back what you heard to ensure you understand, and try to be prepared for the fact that if you word it in different words, they may not know that you understand, even if you did. No, what I'm saying is this. And you might be thinking, that's exactly what I just said. They don't feel understood. So we don't get mad about that. That's what I said. Oh, okay. And reflect it back in a different way so that they feel understood. Validate their feelings. That's no big deal. Everything's going to be okay. Is everything going to be okay? Yes. A 99.99% chance. But they need to know that we care about that doesn't help them right now. And that actually can be a shaming statement where they misinterpret that as there's something wrong with me for feeling upset about this because my parents are acting like it's no big deal. Big deal, and we think we're comforting them and assuring them. That's usually not how it's perceived. Once we get through a certain stage, we're going to talk about how things will be okay, but not right at this point. Avoid criticism, accusations. Well, what did you do that made your friend respond that way? We don't want to do that. Just listen. And the 5 whys are good here, just as long as we're not pointing the finger and making it their fault. Even if it is, there's a time and a place for that. This isn't it. Nurture a growth mindset. Mistakes are okay. When kids know that our love and approval is not contingent upon their performance or them being perfect. We all, showing the beauty in mistakes. Growth mindset. That is foundational for growth mindset. And you're working on this. You're making so much progress. Look at how far you've come. And it's okay to make mistakes and share mistakes you've made, that kind of thing. What can we do to make tomorrow better? Let's figure this out together. And sometimes kids, depending upon what their struggles are, their developmental level, actually having social scripts, practicing some scenarios, and a scenario happens and they already have those at the ready to pull from. They just go to their Rolodex and they feel more prepared. This could be something like if you're talking about a teenager who's going to parties, and they need to know that they can call for you to come pick them up, and you're going to be proud of the fact that they made a good decision in that moment instead of reaming them for going to the party in the first place. I told you shouldn't. That's not what they need right then. And maybe they're afraid that other kids are going to hear and, oh, you're a tattletale. They could have a code word. They call you and they say a code word, and that lets you know that they want, it's good to come pick them up. Reading social emotional books that have common themes of things that they're facing. It doesn't have to be identical. And then talking about that opens kids up because we're talking about the events in the story. What have you faced that's like that? How did you feel? How do you think about how they handled it? What would you do differently? Have you ever wished you handled something differently? And that way it's not as threatening because they're not in a heightened moment and it's related to a story. I'm not involved in that, so I don't feel under attack. But also, we talk about the importance of structure and routine and having a family calendar. Everyone knows what to expect, having family meetings, but we got to have flexibility. We can't be rigid with that. Maybe they need extra support today. Maybe they usually do homework at this time, but it's a good time to go for a walk in the park at the time that they're usually doing homework. Be really sensitive to their needs and during these times. Okay, let's move on. What about when they're like, this was an awful day, and you're trying to get information and it is just a roadblock? Let them know that I see you're having a hard time. It looks like you had a rough day today, but without just pressing, without them feeling like you're an interrogator. You can be a detective without being the interrogator. They're not on the witness stand. They need to know that you've recognized, you're attuned to them and know that they're having a hard time. You can ask, but without prod, because that will shut them down. Again, listen without fixing. I think I feel strongly about this. And we must be the safe harbor for our kids. You know that you might hear some things, and be prepped for this ahead of time. You might hear some things that are really hard to swallow as a parent. Maybe they were smoking, or they drank too much, or they were not kind to a classmate. Just already be prepped for that. You're allowed to feel what you're feeling, but we have to remain calm in that moment and not react to it. We want to be responsive, not reactive, because mirror neurons, you escalate, they're going to escalate more. And unfortunately, if we start getting really heightened, our pupils dilate, and kids will even see that you got a different look in your eyes. So don't be afraid. This is super important to talk about. It is better just, you know what? I want to be the best version of myself for you right now, because that's really important. I'm going to take a break for about 5 minutes, and I'll be right back. That's better than escalating and then them feeling that it's not safe. If you have been prone to jump into fix-it mode, which comes from a loving place, we want to protect our kids, and that has sort of led to this pattern, be honest with your kids, own it. You know what? I've had a tendency in the past, and this also shows them you're more relatable to your kids when you are open about your imperfections. They can't relate to perfection. None of us is perfect. That puts a huge burden on you, and it makes them less likely to open up about their mistakes. I've made mistakes in the past. I love you so much. It came from a good place. I wanted to protect you. So instead of listening, I would just jump into solving it for you. That's not what you wanted, is it? I'm working on it. I'm aware of it. And that alone can just start changing the course of this pattern. Get rid of this pattern. Let them test you. Let them, likely, if this has been a pattern that's kind of caused kids to shut down, and a certain level of this, by the way, doesn't mean you did anything wrong. As kids grow into the teen years, friendships start taking front and center stage. There are certain topics that can be difficult to talk about with parents, regardless of how deep and strong and attuned your relationship is. But allow them to test you, and likely they're going to start by opening up with smaller things. Don't press for more. Accept that. Let them see that you're not fixing it. You are just listening. You care about their lives. You want to understand. And over time, it'll get to the point that they're willing to open up about the tougher stuff. Okay, let's move on. And some other reasons that communication shuts down. Do you have kids' perfectionistic tendencies? We did an entire show about rejection sensitivity dysphoria, where real or perceived rejection is debilitating. It doesn't even mean that you're doing anything that conveys that. And sometimes we do. Sometimes we have this, we think, do your best, do your best. That sounds great. And there's nothing wrong with that statement on the surface. And that's way better than comparing them to other people. Of course, we want our kids to be the best version of themselves. Is it realistic for any human being to be the best version of themselves in every endeavor, all day, every day, 365? It's not. And grit and perseverance are paramount. They are super tied to fulfilled, productive lives. But there is a time to let it go. Ask yourself, in the big scheme of things, how big of a deal is this? None of us has 100% to give every single thing. Sometimes things have to slide. And it's a little bit hard for that to even come out of my mouth, because I'm always like, I want to be the best I can be all the time, but that's not realistic. But sometimes kids have neurodevelopmental struggles that cause them to not have a strong sense of self. Even body awareness is foundational for that. Many different things. They may misperceive the tone of voice because of auditory processing struggles. It can be based on trauma from the past. It could be based on mental health struggles, anxiety, depression. But a lot of kids won't open up because I don't want you to know I'm struggling. And they may even be getting the good grades. They may be on the AB honor roll. So shoot, they're not struggling. They're super smart. This isn't about intelligence. How hard are they working to achieve that? Is that causing them to run out of gas in their tank? This happens so much, especially as kids get older. You think I'm smart. I want you to keep believing that. So I'm not going to share how drained I am from making sure I earned that A or B, because then you're going to think I'm less smart. And then that's hurtful. I don't have my own self-worth. I kind of rely on what you think about me. Sometimes kids have a fear of success. Fear of failure, I think, is more evident. But sometimes I'm struggling with my confidence. And if I do well on this, that's going to put more eyeballs on me and raise the bar where that's the new expectation. That causes me anxiety. Now I'm going to shut down. That will even cause some kids to look like they're apathetic. They care so much that I will shut down and not try, because that's better than you thinking I couldn't do it when I gave it my all. I don't want to disappoint you. Is there anything we are unintentionally conveying that, even though it's not true, is there anything? Perception is what matters more than reality. Are there any things we're doing that unintentionally shame our kids? I did an entire show on that. Sometimes kids will shut down simply because they need time. I need space to process, or I don't know why, or I don't understand my feelings, or I don't have the words with granularity to explain what's going on. So I'm afraid I'll say the wrong thing, so I don't say anything at all. We always want to be providing a rainbow of emotions vocabulary so that they don't just know happy, sad, mad, scared. They also know disappointed, frustrated, uncertain, and what those layers mean, pointing them out in stories, using those words in your own life. Kids don't need to think that we're 100% joyful all the time. They need to know that we have an array of emotions too. That normalizes it for them. There aren't positive and negative emotions. They all serve a purpose. They're all information, and they are to be felt, not obeyed. Sometimes it's anxiety. And that can just be in general. And my fight or flight kicks in. And so the guard dog of my brain, the amygdala, just hijacks anything I'm trying to say to you. I want to, I just can't get it out. Or I can't find if you have kids who are super articulate, but then when it comes to that, I don't know. And another thing to keep in mind is about 78% of students across the country, all the way through high school, little ones all the way through high school, who are in behavioral intervention programs in the school system, have social emotional language deficits. They could have gone through the testing and you don't qualify for services, speech language services, because their academic language is great. It doesn't mean their social emotional languages. This doesn't mean that they don't talk up a blue streak. Think about if you didn't have a context for what your kids were saying, would you know what they were talking about? Or is your brain naturally filling in the gaps? They use very generic language. I'm going to give you an example that's not even social emotional, because this can also happen in other kinds of language. I put the thing over there under the stuff. That's sort of an extreme version. If y'all have a routine and you already know the thing is the backpack, how many words are you filling in? Hey, Tony, good to see you. True story.
I love that.
Yeah, this happens to all of us from time to time, where we can't get the words out, even if we're usually articulate. Some of these kids have true deficits in this area. And by the way, you can get qualified for services, even if it's social pragmatic communication and academic language is rock star status. There are informal measures that you can specifically request the therapist at the school do. If you want more information on that, just message me and I can help you through that. I used to work in the school system. But it's important to know they could be talking up a blue streak. They might write beautiful papers for history class. They can carry on a conversation. I have literally worked. I remember specifically, this has happened many times, but one that sticks out in my mind. We worked with a 3.5-year-old who was just continually getting kicked out of daycares. And one thing that was disguising his deficits is that his auditory processing and his language skills were at age 8. Except for, and can you imagine, that is way over twice his age, where he was in language, and yet he was about a year-old and 18-month-old in social emotional development, and he did not have the social emotional words, yet you could have a conversation with him like you would have with a second or third grader. That is not an exaggeration. And because of that, it disguised the social emotional language issues. There were other things we need to work on too. In one brain, we can be a 3-year-old, a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 5-year-old. Keep that in mind. Don't let us, so many times strengths mask struggles and struggles mask strengths. Okay. All right, let's move on. So we talked about, these are some things that might cause kids to shut down, but what are some ways where we ask open-ended yet specific questions to get dialogue going? That, man, how was my day? I don't even know where to begin on that. That's overwhelming to me. Oh, now you're narrowing it down for me. What made you feel excited today? What made you feel cared for, frustrated? Go through a few different emotions and give them answers to yours too, as appropriate with discretion. What did you do today that was kind? What did you do today that showed patience, if that's something they're working on? What did somebody else do for you today that was kind? Did you show your gratitude? Did they know how much you appreciated it? What can you do tomorrow to let them know? This is such a great way for social emotional language and growing all of those skills, but also connection and getting meaningful information about the day. Who did you sit with at lunch? What did y'all talk about? What did you do at recess? Or did you go to the science lab today? What kind of experiment did you do? What did you think about it? On a scale of 1 to 5, how was your day? And you've already gone through, 1 means worst day ever, 5 means best day ever. And everybody around the dinner table rates their day from 1 to 5, trying to stay away from the 1s and the 5s for the most part, and share why it was a 2, 3, 4. And it really starts growing perspective. Big picture, let me get out of this telescopic view of the one thing that made me say this was the worst day ever and put on the wide angle lens. We are not denying that part was stinky, but it also helps them see some of the good, right? We do not debate the fact that it's not the worst day ever. We talk them through and teach them perspective, but they are feeling it was the worst day ever. That is legitimate, and we validate it. But then cognitively, we grow that perspective. Tell me one thing you've learned today. How cool is that? And that also helps the learning, but what was your favorite mistake? What if we made that a normal part of our conversations? My favorite mistake was when I was cooking and I did this and I figured out that a shortcut because I made that mistake. These are just examples, springboards to show you how none of these are answered by a yes or a no, and yet they're targeted. This gets real conversation going. Okay, let's move on. Now, sometimes some of the issues that they're coming home so upset about are social related. Maybe it's bullying. So here are a few things that kids need to know. And by the way, for anyone who wants a deep dive on how to raise kids who don't give in to peer pressure, bullying shows, I have done entire shows just on these topics. But peer pressure is not always verbal, direct, obvious, or about right versus wrong or going against your will. How about that? Sometimes peer pressure happens just because I'm exposed to something, or there is an implied threat that I'm going to be removed from the group. That kind of thing. Sometimes it's something that's not true to who I am, even though it's not a matter of right and wrong. That is still me giving into peer pressure. Am I being true to who I am and to my values, right? Sometimes I agreed to do it. It doesn't mean there was a physical threat and I, quote unquote, had to. Kids need to know what peer influence looks like. It's not always negative either. Talk to them about how modeling pro-social behavior, in other words, altruistic, looking out for the welfare of others, kindness, can decrease bullying. There is research on this. Onlookers are complicit. They are guilty when they don't intervene. Okay? A lot of times kids don't realize that. They might have stood by because, man, I'm just relieved it's not me this time. And they might feel guilty about that. And yes, is that the best thing to think? Maybe not, but it's also understandable. Think about a kid who has just been tortured, and that little bit of relief might be human nature, especially given their developmental age. But they need to know that fear is the number one reason for inaction. I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing. I'm afraid that someone will retaliate against me. I'm afraid of being called a tattletale. Having conversations about the difference between tattletaling and being an upstander, someone who stands up for what's right. You can trust caring adults. Who are the adults you can most trust? I can talk to you. Yes, that's right. Who else? What about at school? Help them. This is kind of part of getting that social script ready so they have a game plan. And in the moment when they're heightened, they don't have to think of what to do. You've already sort of walked through these scenarios. I've shared these books before. I have to say it since we're talking about bullying. There is a 3-part series. It is my favorite book series on bullying of all time because it is the same story told from 3 different perspectives. It's called Weird, Dare, and Tough. Weird is a story told from the perspective of the person being bullied. Dare is the one told from the perspective of the onlooker. Do I stand up and do the right thing, or do I remain quiet? I'm friends with this, what do I do? And Tough is the one told from the perspective of the one doing the bullying. And I am saying the one doing the bullying instead of the bully, because if we call someone a bully, we just labeled them. That is a fixed mindset. That is who they are. How is it that they're a bully? It's just who they are. And yet you're telling me I can grow in math. I can grow in patience. If we're defined by our actions, that is an inconsistent story. And research shows that when we separate the action from the actor, bullying decreases, retaliation decreases, and kids are much more likely to change their behavior, the one doing the bullying. Okay. I mean, there is very compelling, and it is a body of research. I'm not talking about one random research study. Yeager, Dweck, for anyone who loves reading research, they are some of the leading researchers on growth mindset, the power of yet, the one doing the bullying instead of the bully. Kids need to know that groupthink. Let's say they need to know this for themselves as well as if they are the recipient of this. Groupthink often decreases empathy and values aligned action. I thought she was one of my best friends. I can't believe she did that. And helping kids understand that sometimes that we're not defending what they did, but they were being exposed to 6 people saying this, and that what happens in our brain is we start feeling for someone less in that moment. It doesn't mean your friend doesn't care about you and love you. Have you ever been in a scenario where you felt pressure to go along with something, even though in your gut it felt really bad and you might have even felt guilty later, Mm-hmm. And they really need to understand groupthink. And that's why it's so important, that we help guide them without telling them who to be friends with, which kind of goes into the next page. When it comes to friendships, we never want to tell, on the next slide, we never want to tell kids to stay away from that friend. Even if, I'm not going to say the word never, because always and never are not good words to use. Usually, the vast majority of the time, this is not the best route because, kids are going to tune you out. They're more likely, now that friend seems even cooler. I'm a tweener teen, and I'm going to be a little rebel on this. What do you know? You're a million years old, and you're like 35. That was like way in my rearview mirror. Mm-hmm. But instead, we want to listen calmly and guide them to see the negative influence. Have you noticed any differences in the way you talk or some of the decisions you're making, depending on how many of those gaps they can fill in? You're not saying it is that person's fault, because we're also would not be teaching boundaries. It would be teaching our kids a lack of responsibility if we blame it on the friend, which is an important note there. But just, they share something, your hair maybe on the back of your neck may be standing on end, you may be getting chills. Listen calmly. Take that moment if you need it. And what do you think accounts for why you decided to drink or decided to try that drug or treated your friend that you've had since 2nd grade that way? Why do you think that is? And help them come up with the answer. We do not talk about, I don't like that friend. They're so disrespectful. We don't want to do that. Just the behavioral concerns. How do you know somebody's a good friend? See, you're talking about what you want them to focus on instead of focusing on what you do not want them to focus on. Just like we tell kids what we want them to do, not what we want them not to do, like touch gently instead of don't hit. There's sort of a similar principle here. They're not going to be defensive. If you feel on the defensive, are you as open-minded as you are? Any of us, if we're not on the defensive. We're not talking badly about them. I notice that when y'all are together, XYZ happens. Have you noticed that? And talk about the qualities of a good friend. Read books about good friends. What kind of friendship do you think they have? What are some friendships you have that are like that? Forbidding friends you don't like from coming over. Hey, this is a great time to give them space. You're not invading their space, but you have eyeballs on the situation. That gives you a lot of important information. Pay attention to the dynamics. Do they put down your son or daughter? Do they talk them up, feed their ego? Is it respectful? Is it reciprocal? Is it one's the leader, one's the follower? Do they come up with their plans together? So much information there. And don't assume it's bad parenting or speak poorly about the other parents either. Well, their parents must just be in a world, in their own little world. They're just too focused on themselves, or else they would never let their kid do that. We don't know. We don't know the situation. Just like we never know what somebody else is going through. And maybe they are feeling very similar to how you're feeling. And wow, what have I not tried to get this ship steering in the right direction? Get to know the parents. Make a point of that. Hey, let's meet up for coffee, or having phone calls, on Facebook, the little call thingy, whatever that's called. But get to know them. And y'all can agree on parameters. So here are some of our house rules. And I know that find out if your values align. And we can't instill our house rules in somebody else's house, but they do need to know that this parent is not okay with this. So when they're over at my house, we don't allow this when they're with this particular friend of theirs. So those are good ways to handle it. All right, let's move on. Another thing that gets in the way, we're nearing the end here, but explaining learning, schools call them learning disabilities. I like learning differences. To kids by the age around second grade, kids need to know if they have a learning difference, learning disability, they need to know, I have dysgraphia, I have dyscalculia, I have dyslexia. But what does that mean? And they need to understand that it's something separate from who they are, right? So talk about what that means. That means that sometimes the sounds get scrambled and it makes it harder to sound out words. It makes it harder to spell. It does not mean, I'm stupid. No, it does not mean that, and talk about what it does and does not mean. Answer their questions. There are years beyond, but about second grade is when they need to know what it's called. And sometimes there's a time and a place for these labels. I mean, schools will sometimes make sure that kids have the labels they need so that they qualify for an IEP or 504. I also understand that some families want to avoid a label if we can avoid it. And there's a lot of times a label's not necessary. People ask me what I think about this all the time. And it is extremely individual specific on what is the challenge and what is to be gained and what, the pros and cons of every scenario. But I do want you to know that often when it comes to learning differences, kids feel relieved when they recognize that, oh, I have these strengths, I have these abilities. There's this one thing, it doesn't define me, but it's part of how my brain works that explains this, so I don't have to beat myself up about it anymore. Mm-hmm. While we're on this topic, I will say also that sometimes kids get an inaccurate label for the right reason, with the best intentions. And there are pros and cons to this as well. For example, some school systems don't have many kinds of reading support programs except for dyslexia. So if your child has a struggle in reading, they may get the label of dyslexia in order to qualify for services. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it is dyslexia. That's an important note. That has caused a lot of families confusion. They may have, for example, a visual perception or processing struggle that has some of the same symptoms as dyslexia, and how you address it is totally different. So you might notice some growth initially from being in this reading program because the pacing is different and there's more one-on-one instruction. But if after 2 or 3 years, you're like, it helped at first, or it's helped some, but not as much as I would think, it may not be dyslexia. And it doesn't even mean the school thinks it is necessarily. It's like, this is how we could get you the support, with the limitations that are there. But correct their misperceptions. Have you ever heard of that before? What do you think it means? And that way they may not ask questions. They may not even think to ask certain questions that illuminate what their misperceptions are. So asking them their understanding of it, what they misperceive about it and know kind of what to correct in that conversation. Emphasize the struggles are not their fault. If anybody could overcome this, it's you. This is just something separate and apart, but we're going to tackle this together. But what are some things you're great at? It's so important to recognize the struggle and celebrate the strength. I know a lot of people get into debates about, don't tell kids they have superpowers because then you're not empathizing with the struggle. Or don't talk about the struggle because then they're going to feel bad about themselves. No, it's both. We are all multifaceted. Kids need to know that we are all a set of strengths and struggles. It's a matter of degree and how much it's impacting quality of life and how drained is their battery. Emphasize your support. I am here for you every step of the way. And if you don't have an answer that they ask, you know what? I don't know the answer, but I'm going to find it for you, or let's find it together. Let them know they can learn. It's just a unique course. We all learn in different ways. And here are some things we're going to try. Do you have any ideas, things you think might help you? Share insights from challenges you faced. Does Uncle Stephen, does he have a learning difference? And they have a really great relationship, things that they can talk about. Sometimes that's more helpful than talking about some famous person, that has it, because it's just more personal. And look at his life. What do you think about how he's happy, he's this, that, and the other, but this is a struggle. Okay. Anytime you're talking to kids about any kind of struggle, issue, concern, it's more important to figure out what is the underlying faulty belief. Find the patterns, log these things they say. What did they say about their day? Look for the patterns. You may think they'll be obvious just by remembering, but writing them down, patterns start to emerge. Are they lacking confidence? Is it perfectionism? I've done an entire perfectionism show. I've done an entire show about evidence-based ways to grow self-esteem. And it's not all about rah and positive affirmations. Those backfire, and I explain why. Is it an issue of them knowing how to set up boundaries? I have done an entire show on teaching kids about boundaries. Is it that they don't know how to advocate for themselves, whether it's in a social situation or when they need extra support from the teacher? Is it about impulsivity? Is it that impulsivity is more than jumping out of your chair or blurting out answers when you're not supposed to. Impulsivity also means I have this automatic thought and I act on it, or I just assume it's true and I don't take the time to what's something else that accounts for this. Is it because of school struggles? Are they having the accommodations they need? If they're in middle school, do they have those accommodations available, but it embarrasses them? Well, part of that plan needs to be that we will be discreet when we remind the student and have them attend those meetings and talk about things they think would help them. They need to start taking ownership of this. Is it about people pleasing? I mean, there are a lot of causes of that related to rejection sensitivity, confidence, trauma. Daddy left our household. Now I'm afraid of other people leaving me too. I'm going to be your yes man. All or nothing thinking. Everything's great. Everything's horrible. I had the worst day ever. 1 or 2 bad things happen, but a whole lot of good. That shows you a lack of cognitive flexibility. That is a foundational cognitive skill. Catastrophizing. We get into these negative ruts of thinking. Mind reading. I know what you're thinking about me. We're so bad at that. We think we're good. Research shows we don't read minds nearly as well as we think we do. Making a mountain out of a molehill. That is a rut of thinking that happens when kids struggle with being able to, let me take in the wide angle lens and then see how these details fit in the big scheme of things. How big of a deal is this? Being able to take on someone else's point of view. Is it I'm right, you're wrong? I don't know how to take on someone else's perspective. That's called theory of mind. We start growing that by age 3. Cognitive load, working memory. Is it that they make the grade, they're the MVP on the team, but they have to work way too hard to get it. We have certain things we do in life that are meant to be automated so that I'm not at my I'm not just up to my tipping point all the time. So many kids stay quiet on this. It's not just about the end product. How hard are they working to get there? Working memory is many experts in ADHD research say ADHD is really an issue of working memory, which comes before the attention. And there are 3 top tier executive functions. Working memory is my mental sketch pad. Does their sketch pad get filled up because they're having to work too hard? They don't know 6 times 6 is 36. So they have to figure that out before they can do the rest of the equation. Multiply that times your whole day. Social language skills. Do they have a filter? Do they know sometimes it's better not to say anything at all? Do they misread anger or disapproval that isn't there because they're misreading body language? Do they go over their head, or do they read in things that literally aren't there? They feel that someone's rejecting them and it's not even happening. Is it anxiety? Negativity bias? These are just examples. This isn't even an exhaustive list. We must look for the patterns of their faulty beliefs because that guides us on how to help them through. So let's move on. For example, we won't go through all these. I've shown you this slide before. But if they beat themselves up, if they're have perfectionistic tendencies, and by the way, if someone is perfectionistic, it doesn't mean that they're perfectionistic in all realms. I have no shot at being good at this, so I'm going to opt out on that. I think I can be the best at this, so I am going to impose an impossibly high standard and beat myself up if I don't reach it. That can look like over competitiveness. Perfectionism can be other imposed. I expect perfection from you, Mom. I can do whatever I want. It's not even always inward directed. But what else accounts for the outcome? If you have someone, we lost the game, it's all my fault. What else accounts for it? Well, it was raining outside. One of our other best players was sick today. Now, if your kids aren't taking responsibility, probably the worst thing you could ask them is what else accounts for the outcome. But if you have someone who takes the entire burden on themselves and expects too much of themselves, that's the perfect question to ask. You can see why figuring out what are the patterns and the faulty beliefs guides us on sort of mantras we teach them to ask themselves. Is this a fact or is it just a thought? Thoughts are not facts. They are pieces of data that we have to explore to see if they're true. Just like we're not to obey emotions, we're to feel them. Just because we think something doesn't make it a fact. Do your kids know that? What is a more useful thought? What's another way of looking at this? That one is fantastic for really growing big picture skills, perspective, point of view, flexibility. Does this matter in the big scheme of things? I'm so honed in here, I hadn't thought about tomorrow, nobody's going to care, So what these questions are that we teach our kids depends on what their patterns are, but these are just a few examples. Okay, finally, just moving on. I wanted to give you an example of negativity bias. If you have kids who seem very negative, they're quick to say no. This was the worst day. Everything's awful. I wanted to remind you about this. Look at this little brain over here. Look at all the awesome stuff. Good, 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 good. And then we have the little brain that's not ideal. And that is where the magnifying glass is. That is called negative memory bias. We all have it, believe it or not. It is a natural tendency where we remember the negative more than the positive. But if you have been misunderstood, remember by the age of 12, experts estimate that the average kid with ADHD has received 20,000 more negative comments than their neurotypical peers. So have they, you're so stubborn, you're so lazy, how many times have they heard that? That is going to amp up their negative memory bias big time. They have felt rejected. They've been through bullying. They've been shamed intentionally or unintentionally. They have experienced failure. They had to repeat a grade. Doesn't make them failures, but do they know that? And then there's a confirmation bias that this is the worst day. I knew it would be awful. I already go into today knowing it's going to be bad. And so then I look for proof that that's right. And then I'm going to remember those things more. Yep, I studied for this test and I still bombed it. I knew it was going to be bad. And now I'm going to go to this next class and the teacher's going to give me that look. Yeah, I just saw that. They looked at me. And then But it is understand that this is a real belief. We got to be aware of this. But then knowing that these biases exist, that still does not tell us the root cause. Why? Why do they have such a negative memory bias? Do they have poor working memory, emotional dysregulation, impulse control issues? Do they have trouble seeing the big picture? We got to dig. We might think we know why something's happening and then say, why is that the case? Keep going until we're to the root cause. That is how we can affect permanent improvement. Okay. And I just love this. The most important thing in communication is hearing what isn't said. The art of reading between the lines is a lifelong quest of the wise. We know this, but we need to make sure kids know this too. Sometimes kids will take everything so literally and only go by the words because they miss the warmth, the love with which it was said, or they miss the context. But we as parents also, if your kids are being quiet, they're shutting down, that's telling you important information. We need to look at how they said it. And if we're buried in our phones, we can't do that. But yeah.
Thank you so much, Heather. Today's show was so full of amazing tips, and I definitely pulled some questions that I'm going to use today with my kiddos after school and to avoid those yes, no's, because I am guilty of that. So we so appreciate all the information that you shared today. As you can see, all of the different ways you can reach out to Heather and your local Brain Balance near you in Texas. Heather's always checking the inbox, so make sure you reach out and get signed up for the newsletter. Is there anything else you want to say today, Heather?
No, I think that's it. Just thank you, everyone, for sharing your time with us. And thank you, Jessica, Miss Phonics expert, literacy expert. But I appreciate your time. And we are planning to be back at our usual time next Tuesday. Just so you know, this was a last minute, had to switch, life happens kind of thing. But we plan to be back next Tuesday at 11 Central.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll see you next week.
Have a great week, everyone. Bye.